Hi, welcome back to Post It. So when we left off, unfortunately, Wolf was cleaning his locker out. He's decided to leave, and he's just noticed all the Post-it notes that are on his locker. It's pretty incredible, Dee Dee said, don't you think? Wolf didn't respond. Maybe he couldn't find the words. It didn't matter. He had plenty to choose from. He quietly ran his fingers over the notes, tapping them gently, as if he found some kind of melody there, a secret song that only he could hear. I wasn't even sure he was even reading them, but then I saw him smile. He must have gotten to the note that said, I think you're hot. You can take them, I said. I'm pretty sure they were meant for you. Wolf shook his head. No, I think the longer they stay up, the better. He dropped his hands and stepped back. His voice crackled a little. It's crazy. I don't even know this many people. I'll bet half of them didn't even know I existed. He leaned over and settled his head on Rose's shoulder, and we stood like that for a minute or two, and I realized this is the last time I would ever meet Wolf at his locker. My heart started to ache. Come on, Rose said. Let's go get your stuff, get out of this place, and do something fun. Wolf nodded solemnly and carefully opened his locker so as not to knock down any of the notes. It was practically empty inside already. There was his math textbook, a magnet mirror, an empty bottle of Coke, a sweatshirt that he might never wear again, and at the bottom there was one note. It had been folded into an origami fish and shoved through the slats. Gee, I wonder who that note could have been from, I said. Rose smiled knowingly. I didn't write it, if that's what you're implying. I actually found it stuck to my locker the day of the gauntlet. I don't know who wrote it, but it seemed like good advice, so I put it in here for you. Wolf crouched down, unfolded the note, and held it out for us to see. It was written in black marker, all caps. It said, keep your head up, keep your eyes forward, don't let go. I thought maybe you could use it more than I could, Rose said. Besides, everybody knows that origami wombats are good luck. Oh, this is a wombat, huh? I said. Rose nodded. Duh, she said. What else could it be? And as usual, I didn't have an answer. But I don't mind being dirred by Rose anymore. Some things just take time to get used to. I caught a glimpse of Wolf in the mirror stuck to his locker, maybe a little misty-eyed, and the three of us standing behind him. You don't have to go, Dee Dee said, saying out loud what we were all thinking. No, I don't have to, Wolf answered, and then he stuffed the wombat in his pocket and softly shut the door. The invitation. Wars should teach you things, though judging by how many humans have had, we are all possibly terrible students. Not me, though. I learned more in the 2 weeks following that first Post-it note than I did in 2 years of middle school altogether. Like, you should know that putting your dirty laundry in a basket, because you never know when a girl's going to be coming along to see something lying in the middle of the floor, and that there are better ways to let your emperor know he's being a jerk than stabbing him 23 times. Or that people who get embarrassed by other people who laugh or sing too loud don't have the guts to laugh or sing themselves. You can't have it both ways. The road forks sometimes, and you have to choose, and you have to pick the path that looks least perilous and watch out for the trees on your way down. You can't be friends with everyone. Even the friends that you do have won't be friends forever, which royally sucks, but as my mom would say, that's life. And finally, if you can't say anything nice, like not a single freaking thing, then maybe you should keep your big trap closed. But if you have something nice to say and you feel a little awkward saying it, you could always write it in a note. There were lots of changes after Wolf left. For starters, there was a new policy on phones. Too many complaints were flooding in from parents and students, so the administration decided it was a fight that was not worth winning anymore. The new policy said students could bring their phones into school but had to keep them in their locker, that they still weren't allowed in class. That didn't always work, though. But for the most part, students followed along, happy for the compromise, and teacher looked the other way as long as you weren't staring at a screen. I still don't have a phone, so it still made not a bit of difference to me. The phone policy wasn't the only change, though. As soon as Wolf transferred, the big hand promised to start a new program to combat bullying and discrimination. I figured that meant adding more brochures to the rack in the counselor's office, but Mr. Sword volunteered to be the program advisor, so maybe not. I told him I'd help however I could, and he told me that 20 other students had already signed up and said the same thing. Post-it notes were still banned on school grounds. You could still find them sometimes. They were attached to someone's binder or stuck to the side of the toilet. I'm sure there were still a few traded under the table, passed in secret, but for the most part you could tell that they were done, especially since students could go back to texting. The sticky note war, as it came to be called, ended the day we used them to cover Wolf's locker. It's not covered anymore. Now it's just the newest looking locker in the school, and it still sticks out among the rest. Don't get me wrong, the fighting wasn't over. The nudging, the needling, the dirty looks, the side insults, the behind-the-back noise, it still happened, although I'd like to think that there was less of it than before. You couldn't go a day without hearing someone say, "That's not cool, man," in response to an idiotic remark. Jason Baker got a cold shoulder from the rest of the student body. That is, once he came back from a 3-day suspension. He and Cameron started skipping school a lot. Nobody missed him. Ask most students about it, and they'll tell you that the whole Post-it note thing was a fad. They probably don't remember half the things they even wrote. And they probably remember everything that was written about him, though. They certainly couldn't tell you who started it. Maybe it was Ashley. Maybe it was somebody on the basketball team. Just don't ask Dee Dee, because he'll tell you he was the start of World War III. We were a triangle now, at least a triangle at lunch. The week after he emptied his locker, Wolf transferred to St. Simon's, which was a private K-12 school that was probably more than his parents could afford, but was worth it in the long run. It was Wolf's call. His parents left the decision up to him, and he didn't ask to borrow Dee Dee's dice to make the decision. I think he'd been wanting to go for a while. He just needed a nudge. On paper, at least, it looked like an easy decision. St. Simon's had a 97% college admittance rate, but that wasn't why he wanted to go. They had an excellent music program with a jazz band and an orchestra, and they were just as eager to have Wolf join them as he was to go there, probably more so. After all, there were a few good things that Wolf was leaving behind. I started sitting with Sean Forsett on the bus. He was the kid with the crazy curly hair. His stop was before mine in the morning, so he saved me a seat. And in all honesty, it was more like a third of a seat, but that was all right. Turns out Sean was a writer too. Short stories, mainly fantasy. He let me read a few of them, and I had to admit they were pretty good. I mean, Sean is no George R.R. Martin, but I could see potential. Dee Dee had lent me his Game of Thrones books, and I kept them hidden under my bed next to the poems. He was right. They were really good. And after I read Sean's first story, I asked Sean if he ever played Dungeons & Dragons. He looked at me like I was nuts, but I replied, to each their own. We still played, Wolf, Dee Dee, Rose, and me, just about every weekend. And even after everything that happened, Dee Dee still kept his 10-sided die in his pocket and used it to calculate the odds that somebody would trip in the cafeteria and bury their face in their own spaghetti. But he still insisted I go with him every time he needed to use the restroom, and that Rose guard the door. We always went right before lunch, which was still the best period of the day, even though there was only 3 of us. Ben still sat with his football buddies. Occasionally he would look at our table and wave, and if I noticed, I tried to wave back. The 3rd day without Wolf, I got my food and I sat in between Dee Dee and Rose. We had plenty of room to stretch out, but we tended to scrunch together anyway, only using half the table. Did you go to Wolf's last night, I asked, and find out about how his first day at St. Stuffy's went? Rose nodded, taking a bite of her peanut butter and banana sandwich. Yeah, she said through the mash of peanut butter. He said it was all right. They have uniforms, apparently, and 3 times as much homework, and everybody knows everyone else, so it's pretty obvious when you come in the middle of school. Rose would know. She was no stranger to starting over again. Has he made any new friends? It's been 1 day, Frost, Rose said, but yeah, I guess he's met some nice people. That's good, I said, and I meant it, even though I felt an ache. It wasn't jealousy exactly, although that was part of it. I guess I wasn't sure if I wanted Wolf to have a whole new set of friends yet. I don't want him to forget about us. But I understood. You find your people. I wonder what they would call him. Would he have a nickname? Maybe they'd call him Amadeus. Or maybe he'd just be Morgan. But to us, he'd always be Wolf. Rose punched my shoulder. Apparently I was staring off to space again. Earth to Snowman. Come in, Snowman. Look, I made you something. She handed over a fish folded from her old math quiz that she aced. She was incredibly smart, that Rose Holland. A total nerd, pure tapioca. And she ate deadly, tree-studded kamikaze hills for breakfast. She was frankly kind of awesome, and I was a little surprised she was still wanting to hang with us. What is it this time? I asked, taking the fish from her. Knowing Rose, it could be anything. She shrugged. That's the best part. Hey, we're still on for this weekend, right? Dee Dee said. I mean, I've got maps and everything. Absolutely, she said. Then she pointed to his tray and asked if she could have his pudding. There had been a rebellion. That's how Dee Dee put it. Of course, he was prone to exaggeration, but in this case, we cut him some slack. He was the master, after all. He had done all the prep work. We were just along for the ride. The goblins are revolting, he said in a comically deep voice. They have risen up against their masters and are planning a takeover of the entire kingdom. All men and women included. Viva la revolucion, I said, refusing to pass up a chance to tease the dungeon master about his limited Spanish. Charlene doesn't do goblins, Rose protested, twisting her little cardboard gnome around. We were all sitting on my scratched-up dining room table. Rose was looking scrunched in a corner, but it didn't seem to bother her. She considers them beneath her. Swords don't discriminate, Dee Dee told her. Mine does, she said. Oh, I find that hard to believe, Wolf said. Rose looked at Wolf and smiled. She reached for the bowl of chips, sour cream and onion, but he snatched them away from her. Not until you promise to play fair, he said. No making up random powers you don't have, and no bullying Dee Dee into letting you re-roll your dice because you feel like it. You're a downer, Rose teased. Since when does Wolf Thompson play by the rules? I think it's the school uniform, I said. Wearing khaki all day makes him tame. Lay off the khaki, Wolf warned. I happen to look good in slacks and polo. Besides, on Friday we get to wear jeans. Oh, you're a rebel, Rose snarked. We joked about Wolf's new private school, but truthfully, he seemed really happy there. And the rest of us were just jealous he had an open campus that we had to eat in, and we still had to eat in this obnoxious little cafeteria. Are we going to get started or what? Dee Dee said, getting impatient. I nodded and poured us all a round of red cream soda, which had become the only beverage served in taverns across the 5 realms. Our little table was crowded with all of Dee Dee's maps and guides and towers of dice and dips and chips and cups. We had started switching houses every week, and it was my turn to host. Kind of a shame because Rose has a gigantic basement with an expensive-looking poker table that is perfect for dragon slaying, plus a huge TV and a fridge full of soda. I lobbied to get Dungeons and Dragons night moved to her house permanently, but she said her parents would not go for it. Her mom is not much of a people person and doesn't like loud noises. Noise, of course, wasn't an issue for my mother. It's another thing that made her cool. Actually, there's a lot of things that make her cool. She was in the kitchen only one room away, watching the oven, determined not to burn the chocolate chip cookies, and singing Janis Joplin so loud that I almost didn't hear the doorbell ring. Did you order pizza? Dee Dee asked. I shook my head and got out of the seat, the 3 of them following me to the door, probably because they thought I was lying. Outside the living room window, you could see the first snow starting to fall. I saw a car parked in our driveway with headlights on, still running. I recognized it instantly when I pushed open the door. Hi, Frost, Bench said, standing there in his Branton Middle School jacket, with the cap pulled down over his eyebrows, his hands in his pocket. Hi, guys. Dee Dee said hi back, and Wolf and Rose waved. I glanced behind me at the dining room, where you could spot the table. I wonder who had told them we were getting together at my place tonight. I saw the look on Dee Dee's face, and it was obvious then who told him. What's up? I asked. I know you guys are busy. I actually just came by to tell you the last football game of the season is next week. We're only 4-6, and I know you're not really into it, but Coach says maybe I'll get to start this time. That's great, I said, and I meant it. It really was great. Bench wasn't going to be Bench anymore. I'd have to find him a new nickname to call him. So yeah, I mean, it would be kind of cool if you wanted to come. He was looking at us, all of us, not just me. Sure, I said, even though I wasn't sure. Bench focused on Wolf. How's the new school? Is it good? Yeah, it's good, Wolf said. Things are all right. Bench nodded, and I couldn't be sure, but I thought he looked relieved, like that was the reason he stopped by, to ask that question. Maybe the rest was an excuse. All right then, he said, I guess I'll see you around. He was halfway down the sidewalk when Rose called out to him. Hey, Bench, hold up. She stepped outside, ignoring the snow. You could see her cloudy breath and Bench's as they faced each other. I don't know what you have going on now, she said, but we haven't started playing yet, and judging by the number of manuals that Dee Dee's brought out, it's going to be an epic fight. I mean, if it's okay with everyone else, I think it'd be cool if you joined. She turned and looked in the doorway. Dee Dee and I both looked at Wolf. I mean, it was my house. Rose's offer, Dee Dee's game, but we let Wolf make the call. Wolf shoved his hands in his pockets and nodded. I think we could make some room, he said. And for a moment I pictured all of us, 5, cramming around the table, laughing, teasing, carrying on. I'm a sucker for a good image, but I even knew Bench's answer already. Thanks, he said. Maybe next time. Bench smiled and walked to the end of the driveway with his hand on the car door and stopped. No matter what happens, he said, keep your head up, keep your eyes forward. And Rose finished. And don't let go. Bench nodded and got into his car. His father waved as we pulled away. The 4 of us stood in the doorway with Rose at the front of the pack and watched, and I realized from here on out it would always be maybe next time when it came for Bench. Maybe we'd all go see him in his last game. Maybe only some of us would. Maybe just me. Maybe there'd be summer days when we'd meet up at Freedom Park and kick the ball around. But it would never be like it was before. 2 roads and so on. I couldn't predict the dice any more than I couldn't predict the future any more than Dee Dee's dice could. But for all I know, for sure it was cold outside, and the goblins were coming, and the villagers were counting on us, and that a warrior princess named Moose was going to come and maybe save them all. We would easily polish off both bottles of soda tonight and the chocolate chip cookies. Then we would squeeze onto the couch with a bag of cheese turds and settle in for a couple more episodes of Doctor Who. Just enough room for 4 of us, shoulder to shoulder, packed tighter than the trees on Hirohito Hill, telling each other everything was going to be all right, and saying it without even saying a word. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed it.